The photography of Robert Mapplethorpe really encapsulates the controversy and the conflicts of the culture wars of the 1980s. I'm just showing you a couple of examples of his work that focuses on the human body. There's often full nudity. That's not vulgar or repulsive, but there's certainly homoerotic imagery. And I think that's ultimately what some conservative politicians found so troubling, is that these are aesthetically really captivating and stunning. The aesthetic eye renders the human form in an almost abstract manner. And in 1990, there was a retrospective of his work organized. Mapplethorpe had died of AIDS in 1989, and that retrospective was partially funded by that public institution, the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. Senator Jesse Helms from South Carolina pronounced Mapplethorpe's work a danger to American values, and he used the rising fear and ignorance about AIDS to rile up the American public. And the NEA, and this really led to a huge controversy, debates in the federal government. And just for perspective, the NEA's budget is absolutely minuscule compared to something like the Defense Department. It's a drop in the bucket, especially from the perspective of the U.S. taxpayer. But I think what was so upsetting for Helms and his conservative cohorts was to see the naked human body celebrated in this way, and homosexual identity also presented for public view at this time when, when we think about gay identity today, and how, the overwhelming majority of Americans support gay marriage, for example. This was certainly not the case in the 1980s, a much more oppressive time for gays in the US. Andre Serrano's Piss Christ is also part of the culture wars. The name might indicate why some people got riled up about this. It's a photograph of a crucifix submerged in a basin of urine. And that basin was photographed in a tank against a red background with a spotlight illuminating the crucifix. And that's how we get this multimedia image today. Serrano had received NEA funding in his career, not for this work, but for other work he had done. And this fueled criticism that contemporary artists were offensive and irreverent, and that they contributed nothing to society. But of course, the full story is much more complicated. Serrano is a devout Catholic himself, and he's interested in the connection between the physical earthly realm and the spiritual and ethereal. And he was interested in, for example, the Catholic notion of transubstantiation, the belief that during the practice of the ritual of communion, that the bread and wine used in communion actually is transformed into the body and blood of Christ. That's the Catholic concept of transubstantiation. So he's interested in exploring these concepts, but what happens as a result of the culture wars is that the NEA budget is slashed further, and individual artists are no longer given grants, but the NEA instead uses its money to support art in other ways. To conclude this week, we're going to look at two examples of what is called high-tech and also deconstructivist architecture. This first example here, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, is an example of high-tech architecture. And this is an emphasis highlighting here of the kind of infrastructure of a building. In fact, all of the infrastructure, the plumbing, the heating and cooling, is on the exterior. It makes the guts of the building exposed. And And all of these HVAC systems are color coded here to create this kind of visual intrigue on the facade. This is a museum that focuses on modern and contemporary art, and it has a multi-purpose function that is a huge tourist draw in Paris. And really this idea of kind of exposing structure, highlighting structure is at the heart of high-tech architecture. Frank Gehry's work is more part of the deconstructivist school of recent architecture. And Gehry's work shows us how some of the most exciting innovations in architecture are in the area of museum design today. And we can see how these kind of almost unfolding petals, leaves of the museum, they give us that sense of deconstruction, of again, kind of dissecting a building. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain. Again, another major tourist destination in normal times, of course. And it's a center for modern and contemporary art. In fact, here in these two interior exhibition spaces that I'm showing you on the right, you can see a pop art sculpture of a, what's that called? The badminton birdie, done by Klaus Oldenburg. And then down here in this big, massive exhibition hall, this is perfect to show more contemporary sculpture like the minimalist work of Frank Stella that we see here. The facade is made out of very thin titanium tiles. Titanium is very durable, very stable, also very expensive, but it gives us this sense of in organic form. It almost looks like fish scales or snake scales, and the way the light reflects off of this metallic building creates different lighting effects at different times of the day, really dramatic. Here the museum has become a pilgrimage site. The museum is a work of art in its own, really in its own right.